We're going to be looking at question number 13 on the Arizona Merit Test. And you should have that in front of you. It says this: let G and H be integers that satisfy the conditions shown. G has to be bigger than 1, less than 10. It's also less than H. So we know by this one that the G is the small number, H is the big number. Radical G, if I take the square root of G plus the square root of H and I try to add them together, it's going to end up still being irrational. Radical G, the square root of the small number times the square root of the big number is going to be rational. All right, let me show you. Let's just review a couple things. First of all, it's talking about an integer. Remember, an integer is just a positive or negative number. If I could spell it right, integer. It's just a positive or negative whole number. All right, irrational means this. First of all, pi is irrational. But if I take the square root of 3, anybody know what that is? What times what? You can't tell me 3 times 1. It has to be the same number times itself. Well, that's going to be 1.7, and then there's a bunch of numbers after here. I have no idea what they are. But I'll tell you something, they never end. The numbers never end, so it's irrational. Rational means this: radical 4. What does radical 4 equal? What times what equals 4? Well, it's 2. That's a whole number. It's rational. Rational can also be a decimal or a fraction. Okay. All right. But this looks like it could be 1 7/10, but it's not 1 7/10. That's 1.7 and then a blah, blah, blah after it. So it's not 1 7/10. 1 7/10 is rational, but that is not 1 7/10, and it's not rational. All right, so in this question, they're looking for numbers that when you add them together, they're irrational. When you multiply them together, they're rational. All right, and it has to be between 1 and 10. It can't be 1 and it can't be 10. It can't be 1 and it can't be 10. All right, I'm going to start off by looking at this. Radical 2, radical 3, radical 4, radical 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. All right, let's just play around with this. When I multiply the two numbers together, they have to be rational. So let's take two numbers. Let's go radical 9 times radical 4. I'm going to say 4 first because it's supposed to be it's supposed to be radical G times radical H, right? So radical 4 times radical 9, well, look, that equals radical 36. Well, that equals 6. Well, that's rational. But watch what happens when I add them together. Radical 4 plus radical 9. Well, what does radical 4 equal? 2. Plus, what does radical 9 equal? 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. Is that irrational? Nope. That's rational. So we know it can't be 2 and 3. It can't be 2 and 3. We know that much. It can't be, excuse me. It can't be radical 4 and radical 9. All right. Let's try another one. Let's try radical 9 times radical 3. All right, let's see what that equals. Well, that when I multiply them together, that equals radical 27. Well, if I go on my calculator and I go second radical 27, that comes out to be 5 point something, and it goes on forever. So that is not rational. So we know it can't be radical 9 times radical 3 because it's not rational. It has to be rational when we get all done. Okay. What else? Well, we could go on a bunch of these. And in the Arizona Merit, that's why they give you all the time you need, guys. Because you have to play with these numbers to figure out what's going on. All right, I want to try something with you. Let's try radical 2 times radical 4. Radical 2 times radical 4. Does that equal a rational number? Nope, it equals radical 8. If it's radical 8, that's not going to come out even. What times what equals 8? No. You know, 3 point something, but who knows what. How about radical 2 times radical 5? Does that come out? Nope, that's going to be radical 10. That's not rational. How about radical 2 times radical 6? Nope, that's radical 12. That's not even. And we can keep going. Watch what happens when we finally come upon the right answer. Radical 2 times radical 8. What does that equal? Radical 16. What's radical 16? 4. Is 4 a rational number? Yes, it is. What is radical 2 plus radical 8? Well, do you know what radical 2 is? 1 point blah, 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 blah. What is radical 4? Or excuse me, radical 8? It's 3 point blah, 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 blah. So when you add 1 plus 3 and all these blah blahs, you get an irrational number. And that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for two numbers that when you take the square root of those and multiply them, it equals a rational number. Two numbers that when you add them together, it equals irrational. So my answer is 2 for G. G equals 2 and H equals 8.